Invest Africa, proudly brought to you by KPMG.
Hello and welcome to Invest Africa. I'm Nozi Pombanjwa. Now, the world seems to be fascinated by African culture and African design. So why isn't the fashion industry on the continent blowing Paris and New York out of the water? The issues appear to be as complex as the patterns on African prints. To help me better understand what are investors looking for in this particular industry, I'm joined by design giants David Tlale and JJ Schoeman. Gentlemen, thank you for making the time to join us. JJ, let's start off with getting an understanding from you. How would you describe the investment dynamics in the fashion industry in South Africa and also more broadly on the continent?
I think it's a little bit invested. There's a little bit more money that's needed actually for everything. I think the infrastructure of the way that things are working is a little bit, I would say, even outdated. We need updated kind of everything. You know, one should actually start at the bottom to fix anything.
What do you mean by the infrastructure? What is it that you feel needs to be attracting the investment?
I'm just thinking how fashion really works, you know. If you look at Fashion Week, for instance, that's the platform where to sell. So now from the sales done at Fashion Week, it's very, very limited, and yet the whole industry is designed for mass production. So now you have got small designers, which maybe have big names, and then you've got the large mass market ordering maybe from overseas or somewhere else. So none of that is actually local, and that's a big problem. So that whole thing has to start to be redesigned right from the bottom. The way that the business model works in fashion has got to change.
David, JJ wants to overhaul the entire business model of how the fashion industry works on the continent. What are you seeing as the investment landscape?
I think, I mean, why investors are a bit skeptical, specifically in Africa, of investing in fashion is because the business of fashion in Africa is still like at a, I'd say, infancy level kind of thing, because fashion as an industry as a whole is kind of like new to us as Africans. And why do we have fashion capital in Paris, London, New York, you name it? And much later in Africa, it's starting to come up. Not that we don't know fashion, not that we don't consume fashion, but understanding the core business of fashion, we are still like at an early stage as a continent. And I believe it's now the time is kind of like approaching where investors need to start coming closer to play with design houses or brands in Africa. And because, first of all, many years ago, how Fashion Week started was just like come and showcase clothes without the business of fashion in the background.
Right.
Because when you go to New York or Paris or wherever, before you even showcase, you have an appointment with your agent who's going to represent you.
Yeah.
And post-show or before show, you already have buyers that have already placed orders and, you know, to make sure that the business of fashion takes place. So that in South Africa, it's still at an early stage. I mean, we have very few buyers coming to us, very few boutiques in South Africa or in Africa as well. But as we like expand our brands globally, we're starting to have that experience of having the business of fashion.
But are we capitalizing on the world's attention right now? As we started the show, I made mention of African culture and African design just being so big on the global stage. Are we doing that? A quick one from you, David, on that.
I think at this moment, we are definitely starting to capitalize on it.
Yeah.
And many years ago, you wouldn't proudly say, I'm from South Africa. But today, wherever I go, New York, Paris, Dubai, I would say the product is proudly made in South Africa and by Africans to the world, because we have such a vast heritage to showcase in terms of our prints, color, and how loud we are, how loud we express ourselves to the world in terms of clothing.
JJ, are we good at monetizing our culture and making sure that there's a commercial value to who we are as a people and as our heritage?
Definitely, we do have a commercial value and all that, who we are. I mean, we are very powerful if you think how unique we really are and what there is out there that we haven't tapped into. So actually the beauty of the whole thing is that all of the unexplored territory, because it's just how did they say, the tip of the iceberg really, that is actually being looked at the moment. When there's so much more there that is not actually been thought of, explored, implemented. It's just ideas at the moment.
Yeah. And I want to stay on that point a little bit about how we just make these ideas real commercial centers. I mean, if you think of regional hubs like Dubai that sits as a regional hub, you think of New York, you think of Paris, it's more than just the geographic location. What is the magic behind these places that has allowed these places to be fashion giants and leaders in the industry?
Well, it's easy. I mean, those places are up and running for a long time. And I think we were not up and running because we were talking earlier about having international buyers and all that overseas coming in. Are we able to actually deliver to these people? Our products are all imported, so nothing is locally manufactured fabric-wise, for instance.
Yeah.
So we are using an imported fabric. It's not really the best quality. It's not really the best price. It's manufactured here, and then to export that means it's almost an inferior quality to start off with. So it's got to start off actually really with designing the fabrics and all the raw stuff right here at home in Africa, using all our underutilized, unused geniuses, what do we call it? All the unexplored.
But I'm worried about the competitiveness of the model. Do we have the efficiencies, David, to design and make our own prints and to not be taking imports from China and other markets that are dumping textiles in South Africa? Do we have the efficiency to keep the cost palatable so that we can export in a meaningful way?
I mean, in South Africa, we used to have that. And until we went through recession and the clothing and textile industry went down, I mean, there's so many mills that are actually like dead elephants right now. We need to resuscitate that. And coming back to saying, are we able to compete globally? Yes, we can. But it's going to take a lot from the buy-in from the government to help us to resuscitate the factories, the mills and everything else, because we have so much to offer to the world. Can you believe that we are the largest exporter of ostrich feathers? All these most of these ostrich feathers that you see from Balenciaga, Ferragamo and everybody, they all come from South Africa. And wool as well comes from South Africa. We are very quick to send out product so that it comes back so that we consume it much more expensive. I mean, even also in some of their, like some skins in terms of crocodile, alligator and everything else, we export it. We don't do much with it in South Africa. We're very quick to do that. But if we can start believing in ourselves as a nation or as a continent, and also having the government believing in the business of fashion to say, let us bring it back. I mean, you look at the factories, the clothing factories, how many they were closed during recession. But I mean, we have the money, we have the resources. Can we open up those factories again? Can we resuscitate the mills and create employment and start believing in products that are proudly made in South Africa? You want to compete with the world, you've got big problems. What is it that you specialize in as a continent or as a country? So we have big responsibilities. Before we even say the Chinese this, that, what is it that we pride ourselves with? Raw materials we pride ourselves with, but we pride ourselves with just sending them out. We have to start making sure that before we send it out, we utilize the raw materials and excel in it. If we don't have the skills, let us bring in the skills so they can teach us, so that they can be a legacy of quality. You look at the Italians, it didn't happen overnight. They brought in skill and they excelled in it and they worked on it. But that took initiative from the government to believe in the dream. Can
I be a thorn in your side, JJ, and maybe pick up from what David said and just bring in the labor issue? Because, I mean, to a large extent, other markets have always maybe gotten that competitive advantage because they've had cheaper labor. And we know how strong the unions are here in South Africa. Are the unions a threat to the resuscitation of the fashion industry in South Africa?
I think it's a very complicated issue, but where I would start to answer that question is I think everything is relative. If you just think about the economy now, everything is a little bit slow right now. We're dragging. It's tough out there. And now you have salaries and you have the price of, the cost of living. So the one thing goes hand in hand with the other, because the prices of everything just to be alive and to do transport and to have electricity and all that stuff, it's really very expensive then to work it into the cost of employment, salaries, all that kind of thing. So I think if things were, for instance, cheaper, and then labor also would be cheaper. So unions
so it's
and
labor
all
in
that,
context, and that's the point you're making, that you can't just have cheap labor if the cost of living
it's
and everything else is not
sky
lower.
high, exactly that. Because there is a sort of a certain price that an item is costing. If I'm thinking about, just let's talk about a silly idea, a sandwich is 50 Rand and a t-shirt is 50 Rand. How can that be? The one should be at least a fraction of the other one.
Yeah, but how much of this, in terms of getting it right, David, is dependent on how we market and sell the industry to the world? One would think initially that the fashion industry, irrespective of where you are, and maybe particularly more so on the continent, has got a bad rep, and it's seen as a fickle industry, and serious investors wouldn't be looking to the fashion industry. They would be looking to mining or other sectors.
Yeah.
Do you guys have a bad rep?
We do, because I think it goes a long way that the people, especially, I'm just going to horn a little bit on the government. When the government hires people to run the textile and clothing industry, they hire somebody who has no idea about what happens in the clothing and textile industry, whether it be funding or, you know, all those things. Have no idea. Probably they studied human resources or administration or whatever, and then you have to run a fashion or textile and clothing. You don't even have the time to go see what actually happens in the clothing and textiles. And then ultimately there is no passion that actually it is involved. So it's very important that we actually, it's like going back to saying, let's go back to basics.
Right.
Can we hire the relevant people who have interest in fashion or in textile, in whatever? Then ultimately we're starting to solve the problems, because fashion is seen as like just another industry, like, okay, they make clothes. Not understanding that for you to leave home, you need to be clothed. Yeah. Whether your child is going to school, somebody's got to design the uniform. Yes, it may be a white shirt. Somebody's got to design it. Somebody's got to make it. You got to understand the entire value chain. You got to understand how powerful the fashion industry is as an economic force. And people or our government don't understand that this is a multi-billion business that one can invest in, whether it's corporate, whether it's high fashion, whether it's soldiers' uniform. Somebody's got to sit and design it. Somebody's got to manufacture that basic fabric that needs to be cut and made into garments. So we have a lot of responsibilities to, sadly or fortunately, we as a current generation, we are kind of like the guinea pigs to like unleash all this importance of the whole value chain, how important it is, because you can't say, okay, we'll invest money in textile. After textile, what needs to happen? We need designers, we need manufacturers, we need distribution.
And on that note, we're going to take a short break, but when we come back, JJ and David stay with me, and we're also going to be joined by the Group Marketing Manager of AFI. His name is Sizwe Ndimande, and certainly a man who can give us more insight on the investment trends into the industry on the continent as well as South Africa. I'll see you in 2 minutes. Welcome back to Invest Africa. Still with me, my guests in Johannesburg, David Tlale and JJ Schoeman. And we're also joined now by the Group Marketing Manager of AFI. His name is Sizwe Ndimande, and certainly a man who can give us some insight into the investment trends and how to attract big investors into the fashion space on the continent. Sizwe, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Maybe let's start off with you. We've just recently had a recent showcasing here in Johannesburg, South Africa. Give us a sense of the direction of the industry. Are you seeing growth trends? Which markets are the most exciting for you? Over and above just South Africa, where would a potential investor be looking to on the African continent?
Look, I think David mentioned a bit earlier that it's probably one of the most underrated industries in the world. Factually, PricewaterhouseCoopers rates the global fashion industry to be worth 1.7 trillion US dollars. And over and above that, the leading markets, of course, the US, they sold something like 19 billion garments in the 2013-2014 financial year at a value of like $361 billion. So that gives you the potential that is there for a formalization of the fashion industry. So is Africa growing? Yes, of course. Where is the opportunity? I would definitely say on the African continent, because we're still sitting in a space where the retail of African fashion outside of South Africa, maybe a little bit of Nigeria and Kenya, is very informal, it's very trader-based, it's very hawker-based. So the formalization of that creative talent and how it gets to market is a massive opportunity for any global retailer or a South African or an African retailer to start creating a platform that doesn't mimic the United States or the UK, but creates an opportunity where you have a direct-to-market access for our designers, because we're a different economy, we're a different style of retail space. So there is massive opportunity, but it just is in how
do you get the formalization right? Is it a question of policy? Is it a question of regulation? Or are there other indicators that we need to be thinking of on other African markets to really get moving with the formalization of the industry?
It's all of the above. I like to think it's somewhere between, if you've ever been to Accra, Ghana, it's somewhere between the Accra market and Macy's. That's where the solution stays. So we're not trying to mimic Macy's. We're trying to keep the authenticity of the Accra market in Ghana, or we're trying to keep the authenticity of some of our beautiful markets here in South Africa, Durban Beachfront, which has a lot of accessories that they sell, and create a solution where small to medium-sized entities can play in this space without the obstacles and the barriers to entry that exist in a formalized country like the United Kingdom.
Now, one of the things you've raised, and JJ, I want to bring you in, and I think it's, you mentioned Accra, Ghana as an example, and immediately I start thinking of the Kente cloths that come from that market. Are we doing enough in terms of intellectual property? Do we have the business mind and the savviness to make sure that we're protecting the very things that we're saying are a reflection of who we are?
You know, I had a little bird, and all that's already gone out, because I heard the big guys from America came and bought all the rights to our local prints and the koi fabrics and all that. So they've taken it now out of here, paid somebody here, and going to sell it back to us later at a later stage. But what you said there, Sizwe, I think it's correct, 100%. But I want to add to that our market here is very, very unique, and I think if we focus on the niche, that's actually where I think the trick is, because everything is really geared for the mass market, where our kind of shoppers are very, very different. They are people that really know what they are wanting. They don't really have to follow a trend. They are unique. They know what they want. It's sort of like an exclusivity-driven kind of a thing.
But is there tension there, JJ, between niche and mass production in the market, and the kind of support that niche will get versus mass production will get in terms of just retail broadly? David, what's your thought on that?
I don't think there's a battle between the two, because you are serving different markets. Mass market, there's a particular price point.
Yeah.
Niche market is a particular price point. And I mean, that's why we have couture, ready to wear, we have streetwear, and all those different brackets, they serve a different clientele. And you'll never find a bespoke client shopping at a mass market store. So it's never a battle. But also as a design house, you gotta know what is your strength and what is it that you're focusing on. You can't just be like, I'm going to solve the problems of the nation. So you gotta just like specialize. If you're a high-end product, if you are going to do mass production, you focus on that.
I'm going to hop on the IP issue a little bit more. Sizwe, I want to bring this to you. I mean, JJ has explained how the process unfolds and how we end up buying our own design and cultures from other markets. What are we not getting right, and how do we fix this?
I think there is a transition from the creative space to the commercialization space, which is, and the first part of that is understanding the principles of IP. So as African Fashion International, last year we went into a relationship with Adams & Adams, and we took some of our developing designers on the Fast Track program and then the Next Gen program, who are young up and coming designers, and we put them through a seminar on IP. conducted by Adams and Adams, to give them that perspective, to give them that understanding. And I think it just is one of those things that it's a culture, it's a habit that we need to inculcate into our industry. And as the industry grows with the right principles in place, we'll get over that. JJ is spot on. It's not just the koi, the koi creative concepts that have been stolen, but even you've had some of your European designers using Ndebele print and Ndebele artwork as part of their commercialization strategies. And unfortunately, that tends to happen without those creative minds from Ndebele, and that is a problem.
How do we fix it, David?
How do we fix it is just being proud of who we are, first of all, as Africans, and not even trying to compete with the global market. I'm going to make a simple example. If you know a Burberry check print, you don't have to think 500 times what brand is that, because they took it, they nailed it, they put everything there. But us as Africans, we try to do A, B, C, D, and E, and F, J, not focus on one thing. It's now time that we own our own, basically. And just take it back and say, this is how we do it. And if I am Tswana, I'm going to showcase, or Mosotho, I'm going to showcase the Seshweshwe in a beautiful way. And we know this is who we are and this is how we do it. But also as brands, once we start developing our own prints, we start having it's also part of the Bible as for IP. You have your brand Bible. Right. This is a David Tlale print. This is how it was developed. This is how it can be interpreted, reinterpreted, and everything else. All those things, like I said earlier, they are still at a very early stage as South African or as African brands. So we have to take proper ownership and say, this is who we are, we own this, and this is how it was developed.
Let me push for a little bit of self-reflection amongst yourselves and your peers. I mean, for the most part of the show, we've been talking about what investors want, what do we need to get right for investors to come and plow their dollars. Are designers and industry players playing their part to ensure that they are increasingly attractive to investors, JJ?
I think it's limited how attractive you can be for your resources that you have and what you are able to produce with what you really have. I'm just thinking about all the struggling people out there. They can only actually make stuff with what is available, and of course with creativity and all that, but there's a roof, there's a limit. So unfortunately, the sky's not the limit yet until we knock off that roof.
What about collaborations on the African continent? I mean, one of the things that I find when I travel outside of the continent is that there seems to still be this just very homogenous idea of what Africa is. Do you get a sense that we're collaborating amongst each of the African markets, and this is why it's difficult to distinguish what comes from which market? Or should there not even be a distinction? What is African is African. What's your take on how Africa is viewed as a design concept by the rest of the world?
I think collaborations are the greatest thing ever, because when you collaborate with another brand as a brand, you're tapping into a new market and people get to know about you better. I mean, as a brand, David Tlale, we've collaborated with quite a few brands, and that has also exposed us in new markets and also kind of create an appetite to outside investors to say there is something happening in that brand. And it's up to us as African designers to make it look lucrative for investors to come on and bet their millions on us, because I know for sure LVMH did not start out of nowhere. They saw potential and talent and put money behind it, and obviously for us it will be a new thing. As it is a new thing, there'll be mistakes, but it will be growth, and people got to understand that fashion is art. You don't sell it one season and expect profits. It takes time. You're building a lifestyle. You're teaching people of a new taste or the new kid in the block and everything else. So it just takes bold investors to come on and to say, okay, I can see that brand, there's potential, that other brand, there's potential, but come play with us.
And if investors were to come play, Sizwe, and they came in their numbers, how should we be organizing ourselves? For example, if you look at the South African market, there's SA Fashion Week, there's Mercedes-Benz Fashion Week. Should we be seeing the growth of a multiplicity of platforms, or should we be consolidating to a few key platforms for more designers? What is the optimal structure for investment?
I think it's even before we get to the fashion weeks, it's about a fertile environment, and David mentioned a bit about government's involvement and government's role. But further to that, it's the role of the private sector, the likes of African Fashion International, and what they actually do to prepare designers for that investment. Because investment that comes to an environment or an industry that's not ready for it is going to result in one of two things: either an absolute disaster, or the people that were supposed to benefit not benefiting. So the approach that we as African Fashion International are taking is one that ensures that there is a journey to becoming a David for a young designer who is not even shown, or a journey to becoming a JJ, to dress a Miss South Africa. And that journey needs to make sure that you're fortified as a business person before being a creative. And so it's not really about the platforms that are there. It's about ensuring that there are structures that give young up-and-coming designers the fortification that they need to be those businesses.
The very infrastructure, I think, JJ, you made mention of when we started. Final question as I wrap up the show. Sizwe has touched on young emerging designers. David, how are you seeing the development and the training and the focus on the pipeline and the new talent that needs to be coming up? Are we focused enough on that in South Africa?
That's what we need to focus on, from education systems to establish designers, and also the National Fashion Council and the regional fashion councils. We have to focus on equipping and imparting skill on the young designers. Not everybody, most young designers, they want to be a David Tlale overnight. And they don't realize that for me to be where we are as a brand, it took us 14 years. And we are only beginning the journey of being a brand. And you can't cook a brand overnight. And we have to invest as a nation in skill transfer and make sure that we've got specialists, a specialist tailor, a specialist beader, everybody wants to be a designer, everybody wants to be fabulous. It doesn't work like that. The reason why the industry is not taking off is because we don't have skills or specialists in everything. You look at Italy, there's specialists in shoes, bags, tailoring, even just textiles, because they invested in that. So challenge to our governments, invest in this textile and clothing industry. There's so much wealth that we can actually get out of.
Well, the challenge has been thrown. I think we've heard it loud and clearly, and I certainly hope for government who is watching this that you've also heard it, and that is invest in the skills, invest in the people, and then we can begin to build the building blocks of this industry. A very big thank you to my guests for joining me, fashion designers David Tlale and JJ Schoeman, and of course the Group Marketing Manager for AFI, Sizwe Ndimande. For you at home, if you'd like to contribute to the segments and the industries that we look at on Invest Africa, all you need to do is follow me on Twitter. That's at CNBC Africa and at The Real Nosy. And please don't forget the hashtag. The hashtag is Invest Africa. Until next time, from myself and the Invest Africa team, it's goodbye.
Invest Africa, proudly brought to you by KPMG.